Frankie Muse Freeman wore many hats in her remarkable 101 years on this planet. Wife, mother, lawyer, and civil rights activist. As a youth in her hometown of Danville, Virginia, Freeman regularly faced racial discrimination and promised herself that she would find a way to fight the bias she faced on a daily basis. Freeman spent her life fighting discrimination and helping to establish civil rights policies, including helping to end school and housing discrimination in St. Louis. Join us as we learn more about this trailblazer in her own words.
I was born there. My family was there. The church was there. The schools were there. We lived next door to the pastor. We went to Sunday school. We went to church. Whatever was going on at church, we went. And of course, we went to school. We walked to school because our parents did not. It was absolutely racially segregated, and so black people were expected to sit in the back of the bus and no way. So we walked. We walked wherever we had to go, unless we were riding in a car. But we would not. One of the things that our parents agreed was that there are things in terms of the segregation that you had no choice. But if you had a choice, you rejected it. I was graduated from Westmoreland High School, and knowing, of course, that I was going to, and was admitted to Hampton, and that's where I went. But at Hampton was actually, when we would go into the city, we'd find the same kind of segregation there. And it was at Hampton that I decided that I was going to be a lawyer, because there were lawyers who were filing suit, NAACP lawyers who were filing suit. So I decided I was going to go to law school, and I was going to be a lawyer, and I was going to work to change things. That's what I did. I graduated from Howard in 1947, second in my class. By that time, I was married. I had a daughter. But I'm blessed. One of the reasons that I was able to do that was because of the support from my parents, from the support of my husband, his parents. And so I was determined I was going to become a lawyer, but I was not going to do anything that was less than what a wife and mother would do. So I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and do my homework while I was a student there. Howard was, at that time, the only one that at least focused on the elimination of racial segregation. At that time, I mean, I recognized the racial discrimination, but I was not actually thinking about the gender. But while a student at Howard, that's when I found out that actually the gender was actually as effective in terms of denying women the right, because one of my professors told me that my grades were so well that he would like to recommend me after I finished Howard to go to Harvard. But they were not admitted women. They didn't admit any women until even a year after I graduated from Howard Law School. So my issues, in addition to race, have been, during the time of my practice, was just actually having to deal with gender and race. I left Howard and came to St. Louis thinking that maybe I could at least become a member of the staff of one of the law schools. And that was not the case with respect to either the white ones or the lawyer. They were going to give me a job, but I was determined that I was going to try cases and I was going to be a trial lawyer. I was denied. Then I told Shelby, my husband, well, I'm going to open my own law office, and that's what I did. And associated myself with the NAACP and told them I'd be available. And so, suit that we filed in 1952 against the St. Louis Housing Authority, because even though there was no requirement under the law for segregation in public housing, we at the NAACP, the chairman of the housing committee, knew of families, veterans, that needed housing. So we actually, she recommended that they apply, and when they were denied, they contacted us. And actually, by that time, there were so many other issues that I was the lead attorney in that case. Constance Baker Motley, who was Thurgood's assistant, they were all in New York. She was assigned to at least assist me in a way. So we argued that case in 1954. Brown versus Board of Education had been decided by the Supreme Court just before then. So I felt that at least that we would be successful. Now it took a while, but the federal judge did decide a year later that in our favor, that they could not, that the families who were applied and were eligible for low-income housing would be available for Cochrane. About 3 months after the decision, I got a call from the head of the housing authority. In the meantime, the leadership had changed, saying, "You are wanted. You wanted. We're not going to appeal it. So I'm offering you a job to come and work for us and help make it work." It wasn't surprising, except that the people that were in the position at the housing authority when we filed the suit were not the leaders. There had been a change in leadership, and the person who was in charge then was someone who was at least supportive of what we were doing. That was not the general counsel, the associate general counsel. But I was offered $20,000 a year, and for me, that was a lot of money. And I talked to Shelby, and he said, "Oh, yeah." They told me that I would have to leave, or they would arrest me, and I said, "Arrest me," because I knew that my mother, who was deceased, would not have wanted me to get up there and go when they told me to go. But they didn't. What they did was just they shut down the restaurant. First of all, I called a lawyer and told him about it. And I said, "You get an NAACP lawyer," because first of all, this was in the airport, and so he was going to take action. He didn't have to take action once they exposed it. We found out that we'll say it's now open. It's not segregated. So at the time that I became the president of Delta, I had already been appointed as the first female commissioner of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights by President Johnson. I was at the Housing Authority at work, and I got a call from the White House. The Democratic Party in St. Louis, it was on February 14th. They were having a dinner, and he was the speaker. But that morning, I got a call from the White House that the president would like to meet with you at the Chase Plaza at 5 o'clock. And that's when he told me that he had been considering me and was going to nominate me for the Civil Rights Commission. There were 6 members on the commission. Always, in the past, from the time it had been created, was 1957, there were 6 men, 5 white, 1 black. And but one president of Michigan State University, the dean of the Harvard Law School and all. And so when he told me that, I said, oh, those are very, I mean, I was just, I knew the names, and I said, well, I'm not sure, because they are presidents of colleges. And he said, oh, you can handle those deans. I remember that. But he said he had checked me out. He had checked me out with the Urban League, with the president, with the NAACP. And but he had not told them the position for which he was considering me, because if he had told me that, they would have given him the name of a man. And Kennedy had promised that women would be appointed to executive positions. And he was following Kennedy's recommendation. And they knocked on the door and said, Mr. President, they're waiting for you downstairs. And so I left and came downstairs and joined the guests. And the only person at that table who knew where I'd been was my husband. And they did not know until the next morning, when it was in the newspaper, that he was considering me. In March, he had nominated me, and I was confirmed by the Senate and served for 16 years under 4 presidents. All of the years were good. One of the things that people were interested in is whether they would be, whether I would be accepted. That was not a problem. There was never a problem with respect to race or gender as a commissioner, not by the commissioners. But when we decided to hold hearings in Jackson, Mississippi, during the civil rights outbreaks that had been going on, then the newspaper in Mississippi on 2 days had a column. There was 2 columns in which they talked about the colored woman on the commission from St. Louis who needed to just stay home and solve the problems in St. Louis. And they'd spend a lot of time on that. I'd realized many years earlier what you ignore. But you ignore it. It was not going to harm me or anything. But I did think that I needed to keep a copy of it just for my records. What we did, we subpoenaed all of the things that had been going on. Even in Mississippi, with denial of 2 counties where not one black person was registered to vote. We had witnesses. We had 30 witnesses, and we had people that we were there for a week, but it was a 2-day interruption. And on the basis of the testimony, which all, of course, was under oath and all, we made a recommendation to the Congress. And 3 of our recommendations were enacted and became the Voting Rights Act, and they were the ones that made a difference with respect to the voting. But in the meantime, there were other protests that were going on. But even with the protests, and we, of course, I personally even supported the protests. But you see, protest does not prepare legislation. You need the support. So at least Selma, all of that was going on. But we prepared actually the language, the 3 recommendations that became the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And of course, that was in 1965. We held hearings all over the country on other issues relating to gender, relating to Hispanics, and relating to anything that was a denial of equal opportunity. don't ever want to be called somebody who did it by themselves or who's responsible. It took work. It took help. The Deltas helped me. The Kappas helped me. The people who are not members of a sorority or fraternity helped. But there were individuals that I could call on, not organizations. That my church, there are people who help. But whatever I've done, I'm blessed to have done it. I've taken the leadership. I said, yes, do this. They said, oh, we can't. I said, well, yes, you can. Don't give up. Don't give up. So maybe I pestered them sometimes, but they did it. And I will still do it.